Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. In previous session, we have discussed how to create a Razor project in ASP.NET Core and how to read the data from the database. We have completed the project setup and we are able to read the data from the backend. So this is the nav item which we created, books. If I click books, the data will be displayed from the database and it is binding into the HTML table. Here we have created one button to create a new book, and here we have provided two action buttons to edit and delete the book details. In today's session, we are going to discuss about how to create a new book. For that, let me go to my project, go to the Solution Explorer. Inside the book, we have to create a new page, that is Razor page. Right click, add Razor page. Here I am going to select empty Razor page, click on add. I'll make it as create, add. Now if you go to Solution Explorer, we can see two files. One is CS.html, where we are going to use for our design purpose. Our UI will be mentioned in the HTML file, and there will be one class file where we can write our business logics. Let me implement business logics first. Here we have to initialize the DB context before we start our implementation. For that, I'll make it private read only. I need to initialize my app.db context. This is my app.db context. I'll make it as context. Click on context, go to the quick actions, generate constructor. Now we can communicate with our database by using app.db context. Now to create any book, we need our HTML page with all the columns. For that, I am going to return iAction result here, and here I'll return the empty page. Here we will not be having any data. We are going to return empty page so that user can provide the input and they can submit the book details. Once this is done, we can go for a model declaration here to bind the properties. This is going to be books model and it's available in books. Here I'll set the default for this. This property is going to be bind property. We are going to bind the data from our HTML view. This will hold our all the columns, and we are going to use this property to save the data into our database. Let me create post action method here. I am going to make this async method. This is my post async method to save the book. Before submitting any data, we have to validate our model state. If model state is valid, we can submit the data. If it's not valid, we need to return to the page. If it's not valid, we are going to return the page. Else, we are going to save the data to the database. Now we will get the data in the form of books. These books we need to assign to the DB context. Let me call our data context. So we are going to assign these books to our data context. Now once it is added, we have to save the data. When we are using entity framework, always once it is assigned, we need to save the changes. Here we are going to use the async, so I need to use this. Also we have to use await keyword here. Now we will get the data will be saved into our books table. Once data is saved into the database, I am going to return this to our index page. Let me call redirect to page. Here we have to provide our page name. Let me make it as its index. Now we have implemented both get and post action methods. Now we have to go to our CS HTML file and we need to create a design. First we have to provide the title. I'll store this into view data. I'll make it as title. Here I'm going to create one div where I'll give bootstrap classes. For this I'm going to create a card. I'll make this as shadow. So already we have explained how to create this card in Razor Pages. Let me add header for this. Here I'm going to display the title. Let me use the same title here. I'll use h3 tag here. Inside this I'm going to use title. Next to this we are going to call our body. I'll use class. I'm taking 6 columns here. I don't want to display 12 columns. And inside this we are going to create a form. Method should be post. Whenever we are posting the data, we have to use the method as post. So let me make it as form. Here I'll use the label. Here we will get the books dot book title. Here I'll use the control. I'll use the label for this. Then we need the input control here to add the book title. Also we need to validate the data. For that I need to use span. So these three columns we are going to reuse. Let me copy this div. We need book description and the author. Let me change quickly these columns. Then author. This book description is not a mandatory. Let me remove this validation for this. If any column is mandatory, then we can add the validation messages. Here if you see in the model, let me go to the model, books. The description is not a mandatory. Author, that's why we have enabled validation for book title and author alone. Yeah. So finally we need to add the button. Let me go here. These are all the bootstrap classes I'm adding. So based on your requirement, you can add. Margin top 2. Inside this, I'm going to create a button. Type should be submit. And whenever and class btn primary. I'll close this here, and I can give the text as submit. This is the button text. Here let me create one anchor tag. I'll create back to list hyperlink here. I'll give the class and here let me make it as back to list. Save. Let me run my page. Also in the create page, let me enable the debug here. We are running the application in debug mode. Click on books. This is not required now. It's index page. Continue. Now let me click on create new book. So it's redirected to our create page. So the design is showing as we expected. Also we have the buttons here, submit and back to list. Without entering any data, I am trying to submit here. Let me click on submit. It's hitting to our post action method. Let me see the bind property, whether we have all the properties. Author null, book description null, title null, ID since we have not assigned anything, so it says 0. So now let me continue in debug mode. Model state is not a valid. Since we have not provided any data for that, its model state is not valid. If you see here, we are getting the model state false. Here model state is not valid. That's why once I continue, it will redirect to the page and it will show the messages. This is server side validation. Also we need to implement the client side validation also. Let me enter my book title. I'll make it as ASP.NET, and author I'll enter. Whenever we enter these details, this error has to remove. This validation error need to be removed. For that, we need to implement the client side validation. First, let us submit this data. We'll see whether this data is saving into our database or not. Let me click on submit. This time let me go to the books bind property. Here we are getting the required details. Let me continue in debug mode. This time model state is valid true. It goes to the DB context and it will try to save. Once it is saved, it will redirect to index page. Let me continue. We can see the newly added book has been displayed in the index page. Now we need to enable the client side validation also. Before that, let us go to the database and we'll see whether the data has been saved into our DB or not. Databases. Here we use the demo database. Let me expand these tables. This is our books table. Let me open this table. Select top 1000 rows. Here we can see our newly added book has been saved to the database. Now let me minimize this. I'll go to the Visual Studio. Now we have to implement the client side validations also. Let me go to this page. Go to the Solution Explorer. Go to the shade. This jQuery validation related JS has been added to this partial page. From here only we are going to implement our client side validation. To implement the client side validation, we will go to our CS HTML page. Here we are going to add one section. If you know about the .NET Core MVC application, how to implement the client side validation, it will be easy for you. The same way we are going to do it in the Razor Pages also. Here I am going to call that partial page to implement the client side validation. Let me write HTML dot render partial view. I am going to call that partial view. So here we are going to call that page. Let me go back to the Solution Explorer. Let me copy this file name. I need this file name. This CS HTML is not required. That's it. Now our client side validation should work. Let us reload our page. Let me click on books. So our debug point still it's enabled. When we submit without entering any values, it should not hit here. Let me go to the new book. Now I have not entered any data. Let me click on submit. So without going into the our server side, the validations are working as we expected. If I type any text here, so this automatically this validation messages will be removed. See, so likewise we can implement the client side validation. Let me submit this time. It's hitting now. Let me continue. The data has been stored and it will be redirected to our index page. Let me go to the backend. click on execute. The recently created book has been saved into our database. So now we have implemented the create new book part successfully, and next session we are going to discuss how to update the data. Already I created one book. If I want to modify any details, how we can do, we are going to implement that part in the next session. That's it for today. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching.